How to think about being religious or spiritual in relationship to a body is not a simple question, and it hasn't been simply answered in most religious and philosophical traditions. Stephanie Paul Sell, a Disciples of Christ minister and a professor at Harvard Divinity School, in her book, Honoring the Body, writes this: "There seem to be as many descriptions of the body as there are people to describe it. The body is a friend or a traitor, a gift or a task, something precious knit together by God's own hands, or a prison house of the soul, which according to Plato is trapped in the body like an oyster in a shell. Most descriptions of the body tend to fall into one of two camps. Some suggest that the essence of who we are is merely encased temporarily in a body. In other words, a body is something we have. Others suggest that what is essential about human beings cannot be separated from our bodies. In other words, we are our bodies in a fundamental way. Which camp are you in? We have a body, we are our bodies. Paul Sell thinks, and I think she's right, at least for me, that these two distinct ways of thinking about and being in relationship to our bodies that most of us know of and have experienced do not seize us, as she says, once and for all. Instead, if we think about it, most of us, I think, probably notice, if we pay attention, that we move back and forth between them, often in response to experience or circumstances. Play a game of volleyball or do any physical activity that you do all the time, and you fall into, eventually, that experience of flow. Does anyone know that experience of flow, doing something physical that you've practiced a lot? The times that we train for, when muscle memory kicks in and we are our body, beyond some practice of thought and response, this natural ease and deeper knowing. You move to the ball without thinking or planting your feet intentionally in some place, and you rise to meet it, and it passes right into the hands of the player who has moved to receive it. In these moments like these, for me, I am my body. We are me, one shining example of knowing and doing and being. But for most of us, illness, pain, times the body cannot or will not do what we want or need it to do are the ones, as Paul Sells writes, it is just as easy to feel that our body has become our enemy, that it is an inadequate container for the person we truly are. In the course of our daily lives, she continues, we probably operate with double understanding that we can feel both ways, one day to the next, sometimes one moment into the next. And all of this points to the difficulty of defining just what body is in our relationship to it. This unresolved tension is present and reflected in religious traditions, and maybe that's why many of us are confused about not just the problem of evil, but how to think about the body and ourselves in relationship to it, and whether and how to trust it or conceive of it as part of our religious or spiritual journeys. Talk about trust and the body could be whether we can trust in our bodies to reliably do what we want them to. The sermon title could apply to that, and if that's the conversation we were to have, it would be a short one, because trust in our bodies in that way will be broken. It will be impossible to have for the span of our life. And for those born, as some of us are, with chronic illnesses or other conditions, it's been broken from the beginning. But even for those among us who are fortunate to be able-bodied folks, trust in the body of it reliably doing what it should or needs to is eventually going to be eroded as we age. So that's not the trust I'm interested in exploring together. With respect to our religious and spiritual lives and growth, the body and trusting it and leaning into it because we can trust it shows up in other ways, I think, important ways. For all of us, our body is a central means by which we can connect to the world outside us, right? And to other people, both directly and sympathetically, and to the wisdom about our own needs and wants, too. The first two are obvious: connection to the world and others. We know the world. It's so obvious. You and I, we know the world. We take it in through our senses, right? You open the door, the window, first thing in the morning. And what happens to us? We appreciate the gray skies with our eyes, right? And we stretch out our hands and we feel the light, wet rain on it. And we hear the rain landing on the pavement and reflected in the sticky sound of water on tires hitting the road. And we smell that aroma of wet earth and gravity we feel as it pulls and anchors us to the floor or our seat as we walk or roll to the kitchen to sip the hot, sour, roasted taste of fresh coffee that says that the day has irrevocably begun. We know the whole world through our senses, and intimately so. And the same will be true of how most of us know one another. We know each other, even the interior lives of one another. We read that from what we perceive in our senses, right? From the micro expressions we see in a face, from the touch that by its quality tells us something about whether affection or fear or control is part of the dynamic. We perceive it in the tone of voice that will say as much about what the person means to communicate as the words they use, more in fact. We also, you and I, we have larger sympathy for people we've never met. That is an intellectual extension of something we only know through our bodies. We talked a few weeks back in this season of Ramadan and of Lent now, of fasting. We talked about this, how we're sympathetic to the hungry, not because of some intellectual exercise, but because, not just that, but because we remember the embodied experience of gnawing stomachs, maybe only for an hour, maybe every day of our lives at some point. And our minds extend that experience and that knowledge to those we know and are told do not have enough food. We know their pain here, and our compassion comes out of that. Connection to the world, to ourselves, to others, it comes through our bodies. Stephanie Paulsell writes, quote, "At all times, it's the body that allows us to reach out for one another, to steady each other on our feet when we are weak, to embrace one another in joy and despair." And I think we can, we must, and we do trust the wisdom and the portals to knowing that our bodies give us in these parts of our lives. I don't know how we'd live without trusting it. I'm not sure what our religious and spiritual lives, our ethical lives, our choices would look like if we didn't trust this. So in a conversation about trust and the body, we can and must trust and cherish this. In fact, I actually worry about truths that come out of abstraction from the body, which time and time again seems to be more about objectifying rather than connecting, and it's dangerous. And the other piece that our body offers us is that it communicates wisdom to us about our own knowing and being, about ourselves, pieces that are incredibly vital to your and my wholeness. I will admit that I am still learning and leaning into this piece, this portal to wisdom, the wisdom it offers. I don't think connection to and trusting our body's wisdom is helped. I don't think the road is laid well by an education system and an economic system that, in my experience, is very often more what you would call industrial in its framework. The education system that I went through rewarded us for being grinds. And think about that word as an idea that you give kids as something that is laudable, and what it does to the relationship to body. And we all enter a work world that, for most of us, rewards productivity that's very narrowly defined. In my experience, those things make a world in which sleep is often a distraction, and food is functional, and time is money. It's not space to reflect or to pay attention or to go deep, and the body is a vehicle. I started to see how I'd internalized that framework years ago here, and the messed-upness, if that's a phrase. No, actually, sorry, this is a different point, but I did start to realize that years ago, and the messed-upness of it when my husband said something that actually floored me, something that really quickly has become a mantra for me, and this sort of lifeline that pulls me back and anchors me to a different center of gravity, a better one, a wiser and more compassionate one, self-compassionate one. I was working hard, I was exhausted, I was beating myself up at the same time for not doing more and not having deeper reserves, when my husband turned to me and he said, "Vanessa, you are not a machine. You are not a machine." But how many people can think of ways in which we are trained and rewarded, maybe still are, for acting or trying to act like a machine? Well-oiled, asking nothing, able to plug in and grind out our stuff into the world. Memos, whatever that is, we're grinding out memos or code or billable hours or sermons even. I mean, it applies to all of us, right? Or if you have a body or a mind or a life that cannot behave like a machine, how has that made you feel? Beautifully human? Or desperately, shamefully broken? Less than. And what does it mean to conceive of our bodies differently, more soulfully, and befriend them? Because I'm increasingly seeing that actually this body is this incredible vessel for knowing and wisdom, that often it knows things about me, pieces of me, that I am unable to perceive without it. And it's dropping breadcrumbs all the time, and sometimes it's sounding alarms. Some of you know that years back, This is just one example that woke me up to this. I had back pain, and I thought I'd slept wrong, and it got worse and worse. And then I was like, oh God, I fractured something working out. How annoying. And I waited, and it got so bad that I couldn't sleep at night. So I went to the doctor, and he was this lovely guy, and he asked me lots of questions, and we had just general conversation about our lives, which was intentional, I now realize, as he moved my arm and tried out all these poses and asked me about how they all felt. And then he took a deep breath, this sweet doctor, and he looked me in the eyes and he said, Vanessa, your back is not broken. You just have a lot of stress you're holding in it. And my jaw dropped. And he offered me muscle relaxants and PT, and I took neither of them because immediately I thought, oh my God, he's right. And went out and thought about what it was that I was trying to quite literally hold on my back, right? That I couldn't. And I called Carrie Steer Salazar here, and she called 5 people, and we gathered a task force. And the thing that no one could do alone, but I felt like a machine who had to try and do it alone, and that's my problem. We fixed it. Our bodies have so much wisdom about interdependence, about yearnings, about hungers that are actually real and good. We have that spiny sense that tells us when we actually should think something is wrong, right? And we have that warm feeling that we get when we are in the presence of someone who feels like a kindred soul, as my mom would say. And if something or someone has hurt us, our senses sharpen, right, to be on alert for similar situations and protect us. And in places where we've learned that there is joy and safety, we can feel ourselves melting as we should into them. There's so much wisdom and healing and way forward that our bodies hold out to us. To trust in our bodies in this way is to treat all the things we only know through our body as information, as invitations, rather than inconveniences or obstacles to be pushed through if that's what we're tempted to do. To see our bodies this way is to see them not as machines, but as portals, right, to self-knowledge, holding out vital messages that land otherwise on our shoulders or twist our gut, or maybe they show up in the fluttering of our hearts, in exhaustion that says, you need rest, baby, and the overwhelm that says, find some quiet, and in the hunger that says, darling, bodies need food to live, and in the yoga that teaches us where we find spirit, and the singing that connects us to each other, the ringing of bells that reminds us we're interconnected, and what it feels like to do that, to be that. And all of it leading us, I think, to deeper peace and wholeness and joy, and the trick is to hear it before it gets desperate for us to hear it. So whether we are a body, you and I don't know. Or whether we just have a body, I don't know. I think Stephanie Paulsell is right. We can vacillate on that question. And our bodies may not ever and will not always do what we want and need them to do when we need and want them to do the things we need and want them to do. They will fail to fight off cancer. They will not find a way to keep our blood pressure low. They will catch our falls, not always without breaking. And we can trust them to be sources of connection to the world and to each other. And we can trust them to be sources of connection to our own deepest selves and the breadcrumbs that lead us ever more to that deep self. And to do all of that and to embrace it, we just have to befriend our bodies again and again. Lean in with trust. Listen. Cherish, care, pay attention, wonder. May we do so and be blessed by the whole of how we walk and what we bring with us always, wherever we go in this life. Amen.